Hello everyone and welcome to part 15 of building a beach buggy. Now if you're caught up with the series so far, you'll remember that part 14 started the build of the exhaust system on the car, which I said I was going to spread across 2 episodes because it was such an involved process. So by the end of this episode you're going to see that nice shiny exhaust system down there and how we achieved it. So I don't need to give too much of an intro, I've already done all that, but I will remind all of you that I'm not a professional fabricator, I'm a sign writer. I do this stuff for fun on the weekends and in the evenings, but I like to think that I know enough to build a pretty decent exhaust. So even if you are watching it as a how-to, you might still learn something, even though I'm insisting that it's just me showing you how I'm doing it. One thing I will do is address some of the questions that I've been given so far about this exhaust. Now, question 1. Will I be fitting a lambda sensor or an oxygen sensor for tuning the engine? And the answer is no, I'm not going to bother, because if it was a high performance application in a race car, you'd really want to optimize everything. But to be fair, these are really simple engines. People have been tuning them the old-fashioned way since the dawn of time. It makes bags of power, more than I'm ever going to need, so I'm really not worried about that. And also it means I don't have extra cables and ugly-looking bits and bobs all over the place. The next question, are all the tubes an equal length in the 4x1 section? And the answer is no, they're not, but that's just the same as almost every other Volkswagen exhaust on the planet. Because, don't get me wrong, for a performance application, again, equal length headers are preferable, but this isn't a performance application. It's a street car that makes way more power than I'm ever going to need. I'm certainly not worried about optimizing it, so it is perfectly acceptable to have tubes that are a different length. The next question, how do I know the exhaust is going to create the right amount of back pressure for the engine to run properly? I could rant and rave about this stuff for hours, but I'm a firm believer that the whole back pressure thing when it comes to exhaust is a complete myth. All an engine wants to do is breathe, and the quicker you can get those exhaust gases out of there, the happier the engine's going to be, the more power it's going to make. This was confirmed a few years ago on Engine Masters, which is an awesome show, so give that a watch if you can. And it's been proven dozens of times by other people. The back pressure thing, total myth. Don't need to worry about it. That's enough talking. So if you remember the episode that came before this one, we left off making the flange for the 4x1. So all our tubes run up into one, then it goes down to that muffler. So that's where we're going to pick up. So let's get going with this flange. There we go. That's just a good example of what I was explaining on those first flanges that I did, drilling that little relief hole there so that when the hole saw goes in, all the chips have got somewhere to go and you don't have to keep backing the thing in. Right, that's the first of our 2 flanges that are going to mount the muffler to the rest of the exhaust system, done with the exception of sanding it up and polishing it. Obviously it's all going to be buffed up like the rest of it. So the idea of doing it this way is so that I can pass the tubes through the flange itself like that, and then weld them on the inside there, so the outside looks all pretty like that with no visible weld on it. Now the issue that I've got is that horrible ugly collector that I don't want to use, certainly not using that. So I got this cone as kind of like a backup plan. So this is going to be quite hard to explain, but I'm going to make another flange the same as this, but without the central portion of it, so that it can be welded to this cone. But that poses a few little issues, which I totally expected, but it's just going to make things a little bit more interesting when it comes to making it. Basically, I can't make another flange that passes through, because the bolt holes would then be on the inside of that cone. So what I need to do is, before I make that flange, because I don't know exactly what shape that internal hole is going to be, I need to pretty much manipulate this cone so that it's got sort of kinks in it there. So basically everywhere where there's a bolt hole, the cone will be sort of kinked in there. But also, because it's conical and I want to pass it through the flange, the same sort of principle as that one, I want those edges to be vertical. So I'm going to make up a sort of a tool which is only ever going to get used once, really, to hopefully reshape that. Now, I might not have explained that particularly well, but I can picture it in my mind. So the best way for me to do it is just to make it, I think, and then show you what I'm talking about. And to be honest, hope that it works, because I've got absolutely no idea if it's going to work or not. It might make a complete mess of this, it might split it, it might ruin it, in which case we'll come up with another plan. But I think this is going to be the neatest way, and it gives me something to make, so it's win-win. Another thing that's worth mentioning is drilling these holes, which obviously I've explained how tedious that is. It's 42mm tube. I actually used a 41mm hole saw for drilling those, because anytime that you use a hole saw, generally the hole comes out slightly larger than the hole saw size, and that effect seems to be exaggerated the harder the material that you're drilling through. So stainless, obviously very, very hard. So a 41mm hole saw made an almost 42mm hole. It was about 0.3 of a mil under. So I just gave it a quick whiz round with a die grinder with a carbide burr in it to open that up. So we've got a real nice slip fit for our tubing in there. So now you know. Okay, after some quick and dirty fabrication, obviously because this is only a one-use thing, I don't need to be fussy with it, that is what I've ended up with. So it is basically 4 sort of tapered cones, all exactly the same size. I've rounded those off so they don't dig into the stainless cone. Basically, the idea is that I can put that over there, put it in a vise, squash it, which is going to effectively make this more square with rounded corners. But an issue that I don't want to have is that this end needs to remain circular, so I don't want that to turn into a square. So I just knocked up, this is all out of scrap metal, but that just out of a piece of scrap aluminium, so that sits in there. Makes sense? So I can then put it in the vise like that, give it a good squashing, and then as soon as that is sort of almost all the way into there, I can then put a nut and bolt through it to hold it all together, or a piece of threaded bar and some nuts. Hold that all together. Then I can work on squishing those into there. I've got absolutely no idea if it's going to work. One thing that might be an issue is I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to get enough pressure on the vise to do it, in which case I'll go down the road to Tony's and put it in his hydraulic press. But I think it's going to work. I hope it's going to, but only one way to find out. Let's see if we end up with a usable part or another piece of scrap metal. All right, moment of truth. Is this a great idea or a stupid idea? I just want to put a little bit of grease on these just so that it doesn't gall up on the stainless, because it's going to be fairly tight fit getting in there. So we'll just put a little bit of that around the outsides where it's going to be the tightest. Put our aluminium disc in there, then our doodah on here. I just want to make sure I put the seam in the right place. So that goes in there. I'm just going to make sure we're all squared up. How's that looking? Not too bad. Oh, it's nerve-wracking. What's it going to do? Is it going to work or is it going to wreck it? Only one thing to do. We'll spin the handle and see what happens. Oh, it's definitely stretching it, which is what I was looking for. This might work, you know. Oh, it is tight. It's going to be fun getting that out of there. Okay, that should be enough, we hope. Give it a bit more for luck. Oh, don't like the sound of that. Not sure if that was my voice or the Whey! Oh, well, it comes out easy enough, and that's still round. That's nice and square. I think this is going to work. There we go. I've got that as far as that, which I think is going to do it. I've put my threaded studding in there, so now the job is to squeeze these in. And if it gets too tight, I'm just going to warm them up, and hopefully it'll ease them in quite nicely. But we'll go for a run first without any heat. See what happens. Let's try and level it up. About there. Well, it's doing the thing. Yeah, it's really doing it. I think that's going to do it, you know. Look at that. Well, I'm calling this a win so far. That looks so much neater than some of the off-the-shelf collectors that I've seen. And yeah, it's actually formed around those cones really, really nicely. So all I've got to do now is undo that. Which should have done its job and kept that end nice and round, which it has. Perfect. Now we've got to just get that bit out of there. Hopefully it's not jammed in there. Go on. You know you want to. Where's my hammer? Oh, actually that's better. There we go. Look at that. That's awesome. So obviously it's distorted the back of it there, so just a quick buzz on the disc sander to flatten that off, and you should see exactly what I mean. So now I have to make another one of those flanges, basically with this centre part cut out, so that will pass through there, and that mates up literally perfectly. Awesome. I've been worried about making that, and it's turned out pretty good, I say. And a good few hours later, this is what we've ended up with. So obviously all still needs to be polished and finished welded yet, but you can see exactly what we're going for. So those 4 pipes obviously go into that flange there, so they can be welded all the way around, and that seals off the entire exhaust system. Then it runs into there, so we've got a perfectly smooth transition running into there, so it's going to flow nicely. What I'll do, but just before I finish weld any of this stuff, I'm going to really make a point of going in there and tightening up those gaps as much as I can, because there's, you know, fraction of a gap there. We can tighten those up, get that all welded, and it's all going to be one piece forevermore. So yeah, really pleased with this part, because it's a perfect example of me not being able to buy exactly the right part for the job, but I could buy enough pieces that it got me halfway there, and then I can sort of make the rest happen. So that's what it's all about to me. It's just one big puzzle. Isn't that nice? Okay, the time has finally come to stick all these tubes together for the final time. So I'm going to use this as an opportunity to talk a little bit about welding and the process that we're going to use. There are some incredible welders out there. Some guys that do work which is borderline art, in my opinion. You must have seen these pictures online where it literally looks like a stack of coins laid one on top of the other, and it's just beautiful. Amazingly talented guys that can do that. What I would say is that puts off a lot of people. They think if they can't weld like that, that they can't weld, and that's just not true. You know, as a hobbyist like myself, that kind of weld it's not completely out of reach. I've done a few good ones in my time, but it's kind of not really possible unless you're welding the same thing day in, day out with a really expensive welder, and that isn't what we're doing here. But that's not a problem, because like I say, most of these welds are going to get sanded off and polished away anyway, but that doesn't mean that we don't need to be worried about the quality of the weld. And when I say the quality, I mean getting a good even penetration, and also the thing we need to worry about is not getting the weld too hot, because what happens with stainless steel, especially if you're going to polish it, if you let the tube or the material get too hot when you're welding it and you pull the torch away, it ends up a kind of dull grey colour. Basically what that means is you've cooked all the goodness out of it. All the stuff that makes it stainless steel is gone. So even though you can clean it back and polish it, it's going to tarnish. No good. So what we need to do is make sure we don't put too much heat into it, and when we pull the torch away, we'll be left with all kinds of weird colours, blues, reds and purples and all sorts, which looks cool, but it's all going to be sanded away and polished anyway. But that's what we're looking for, and not a dull grey finish. On that note, another thing we need to be concerned about is what happens on the inside of the tube. Now, most of you are probably familiar with how a TIG welding torch works, but if you aren't, I'll give a very simple explanation. Basically, the electrode in the middle shoots lightning out the end, which melts the steel, or stainless steel, and the gas that comes out of the torch shields that weld from the atmosphere while it is still molten. So if you tried welding without gas, it would basically oxidize immediately, go all manky, no good. So one thing we're going to do, which I haven't really done much of in the past, is known as back purging the weld. Basically what that means is the air inside the tube causes a problem as the weld flows through from the outside. The torch shields the weld on the outside, no problem. That dirty air on the inside means it oxidizes immediately. So if we run a hose with another separate feed of argon into one end of that tube and cap off both ends with tape, and on the far end puncture a few holes in it so you've got a constant flow of argon running through it, while that weld is still molten, it fully protects the inside of it. And that's critical for this kind of thing, because we're going to be sanding the weld off on the outside so it's completely flush. So if the weld on the inside is all manky and horrible, it's not going to be strong enough. So I've done a couple of tests with a back purged weld, and that's what you get on the inside, is a nice silver finish. You know we're going to be good and strong by the time we've sanded the outside off. Now, if you've got a professional setup, you can run two hoses off the same gas bottle. But as I've said many times, I'm not a professional. I don't have one of those. But what I do have is a good mate called Steve, who lives up the road. He's also got a TIG welder, so he's kindly lent me his bottle of gas so I can run a separate one to back purge these tubes. So cheers, Steve, much appreciated. That's enough talking, let's do some welding. Yeah! There we go. It's hard to get this camera to focus properly, but that's all it is. Tiny little slug there just to fill up that slot, and then I can zip it flat with a grinder and you'll never know. And the one thing that you really don't want to do is drop your brand new welding torch on the floor and smash the cup. That is a pain in the ass, because I haven't got another one. Boo! I've got to say a big thanks to Nick from Fusion Engineering for lending me this lovely Furic cup, because I'm a stupid idiot and threw mine on the floor and broke it. So, got this tube all clamped up here, clamped nice and tight to the bench. Got our gas bottle there going up there for our purge. So the gas goes up there and out those little holes in the end. So it's finally time to finish weld this tube. So I've clamped it this way so I can basically do all the areas that I can reach nicely, and then I'll turn it over and do all the other ones. Okay, we got everything welded yesterday, so I just chucked it all down there to cool down. It is freezing in here today, so I got good old Rita the heater pumping out some heat. Now I've got the unenviable task of sanding out all those welds, cleaning up all the tubes so that it's ready for polishing. And for that, I'll be using the trusty old angle grinder and a selection of these, going through the grades. Probably not all of them, but you know, I'll figure out which process works the best. But obviously you start coarse, go to fine, until you end up with these fine sort of spongy ones, and then we should be able to polish it up from that. Let's make some dust. I'm probably about a quarter of the way through the sanding process here. So the discs that I'm using for it, first of all, a 120 grit with that rubber backing to basically knock the top off the weld and blend one tube into the other, because it's critical that I don't take off too much meat and sort of put a divot in it, if that makes sense. So that's perfect for just knocking the top off. Don't want to go crazy with it, and that kind of leaves that sort of finish. So it looks like a mess, but then we go over it with a coarse fibre flat wheel, and that kind of takes it to this sort of finish. Again, you do have to be careful with it. You don't sort of take off too much or put any big grooves in it or anything like that. So you kind of keep an eye on the reflection as you're doing it. And the idea is to just get the scratches out from whatever disc came before it. So that one's kind of halfway done. That one is pretty much ready to polish. So you really, I mean, if you really look, you'll probably just about see where the join is, but it just looks like one tube for the most part, which is exactly what we're looking for. So we need to get all four of them like that. Then I can take them to work and run them through the buffer, get them nice and shiny. Then I can weld them together. It doesn't have to make a mess though. I've been at it for a couple of hours, and you know, look at that. And I am caked in it. Another thing I've done to make my life easier is just clamp that bit of round bar there, so I can basically sit a tube on the end there and rotate it around as I'm sanding it, because the trick is to keep it moving so you don't put any flat spots in it. So yeah, now I've got the feeling back in my right hand, we'll get back at it. There we go, that's another one ready for polishing. As you can see, this really does make a hell of a mess. Look at all this everywhere. Looking forward to getting this bit done so I can have a big clean up and then get on to the next bit. There we go, that's all the tubes, all sanded up through the grades, ready to take to work and be polished. It certainly takes some time. I started that at about, I think it was about 9:30 this morning, and it is now pretty much 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So tedious process, but it's made a bit easier by really taking the time early on to get the fitment of all the tubes as good as possible, because the tighter those joins, the better the transitions, the less work you've got sanding it. But regardless, it's a lot of work and it makes a lot of mess. All of that in there is literally just from today. So good to get all that swept up, have a bit of a clean up. Nobody likes a messy workshop. So we're going to chuck those in the car, take them to work, run them through the buffer, and the next time you see them, they'll be all shiny. Right, we're at work, it's blowing an absolute gale out there and pouring down with rain, so you're probably going to hear the door clattering away, sorry about that. Got everything all sat there ready to go. I've already given those bits a quick once over with the buffer, and it's nothing special that I'm using here. It's not even a dedicated buffer, to be honest. It's a bench grinder with some spindle adapters on it and a couple of different polishing mops. So the first pass, I'll go over with that one. It's like a sort of fairly tightly stitched one with a brown polish, and then the next one is a sort of loose polishing wheel, and we go on that one with a white polish. And it's, you know, it's not rocket science, it's just sitting there polishing it really. The only thing to be careful of is that you don't get wrapped up in it and clang the tube into the machine and take a big chunk out of it, which is why I always put a bit of tape around those just to make it a bit safer. But you know the score, any visit to work isn't complete without a little peek under the cover. It'll soon be time to bolt that bit to the other bit and take it for a drive. I can't wait. But that's enough of that, it's time to do some polishing. Do you like my fancy gloves? They came free with a bottle of weed killer. Nice. And there we go. After a full day yesterday of sanding out all those welds, polishing all the tube, we're ready to assemble the 4-into-1 section of the exhaust. Pretty pleased with that. So we've got a tiny bit more welding to do, welding the flanges on both ends, and then we can get to work on the collector and the muffler and all that stuff. Right, that's everything in position, hopefully for the final time, so I can really lock those tubes down to where they're going by welding them to this flange there. So I've got my bottom 2 tubes exactly where I want them. The top ones are just poking through slightly, so what I'll do is I'll tack the bottom ones, then flush those off and tack that. So, you know, so just got a bit of copper around there so I don't scratch my nice shiny tubes with the earth clamp. One thing I've done to make my life easier as well, to make the fitment of these tubes really tight in that flange there, is just knock up this little thing quickly on the lathe. And it's obviously just a piece of round bar with a couple of nuts and a bit of M8 thread in there off a cut down bolt. So I can basically just slot that into the tube, and with a couple of 13mm spanners back those nuts against each other, and it just forces that tube out slightly so I can get a really good tight fitment. Cool, that's that all flushed off and tacked in position. I've got 5 or 6 really good tacks on every tube so that it can't move. And what I've done for the flanges there is just marked them with a bit of tape, numbered them, and then put a little pen mark there to mark the orientation, so I can take all of this off and then weld it together on the bench. This little homemade doodah is working a treat, so I've just put it in to push the tubes out on these sides, get a tack on them. You can see we've got a little daylight gap in between the flange and the tube there. So just give it a few of these. And look at that. No gap at all. Lovely. those finally welded on and flushed off. Just obviously sanded that as flat as I possibly could, making sure to maintain the level on it so I get a good seal with the gasket. And for the gaskets, I got a brand new set of MP gaskets there, so they're decent quality, meant for the 42mm bore as well. So yeah, the stainless, it kind of goes that kind of goldy colour around the flange when you weld it, which I actually think looks pretty cool, and it's going to do that once the engine gets up to temperature anyway. But that's what I like stainless, it goes all funky colours, it stays shiny, you don't have to mess with it and you don't have to worry about it rusting. Chrome steel is cool, but stainless is just, for usability, so much better. And that is the 4-into-1 section, the biggest part of the job. Absolutely done. That's everything finished welded. We've bolted it on there. Got some cool little, they're an M8 thread, but they're an 11mm head, so you get a bit more clearance between the tube and the nut there, so they're pretty cool. So all we've got left to do now is figure out how we're going to do this muffler business down here. So the angle that it's going to come down at isn't enough to warrant putting a bend in between the muffler and the collector. So we're basically just going to cut that at an angle, cut the muffler at a very slight angle, weld it together and probably blend that out and polish it. And then I'm just going to put a clamp round there so we can mount that end of it. But before I do that, this, as you've seen before, is the muffler that I'm going to be using. And these are the factory welds that are on there. And they're not the prettiest welds I've ever seen, but to be fair, most of the time people are going to use these things on a car, it's going to go underneath, so it's not really a problem. So I just want to try and sand out those welds and polish those up a little bit better. And also these parts have got like a brushed finish on them, so just going to try and sand those out and buff it up and blend that together a bit more. Then we can weld it to the collector, then we can weld that on the end, and then we're done. Sounds easy, doesn't it? And that is now the collector welded to the muffler for the final time. So this camera isn't very good at focusing when I get up close, but they're not bad welds, fairly pretty, but I'm still going to knock them all back and buff them up and blend it all out so it looks like one piece. That's come out really nice. Now that's been sanded and polished, and I've also obviously done away with the weld on the muffler there. It's all just a really big, nice, smooth looking single piece. Really happy with that. So all I've got left to do now is to weld the tailpipe on. So while it was on the car, I obviously leveled it up, squared it up and everything else, and I've just put like a tape mark on it there with a registration mark. So now I can tack that on, weld it on, and then I think we're done. Right, that's the tailpipe tacked in exactly where it needs to go. And now I've made this pretty elaborate setup so that I can basically slide this over this scaffold tube. I've got my earth clamp put around there. The idea being I can hold the torch with one hand and rotate the muffler with the other hand, because for this weld we're going to be doing what's known as an autogenous weld. Which basically just means a TIG weld without using filler rod. You've seen me use filler rod on all the other joints because they were all sort of butted together. And if you do a weld without filler on those, there isn't really enough meat there, and it's also more likely to crack in the future through vibration and whatnot. The reason I can get away without using filler on this is because it's sleeved, it's sort of slipped one size into another, so we've got plenty of meat there. So we're effectively just going to be melting this outside layer into the inside layer. So hopefully that makes sense. And that is that, finally welded. So I'm just going to let that cool down, and then I can hit it with the buffer, take some of that discoloration away, and that's the final part of the exhaust welding done and dusted. Okay, that is a wrap for the welding on the exhaust pipe. It's really hard to film that because all it does is reflect it, but you can see that's come out pretty nice. Now it's all polished up. We're almost ready to bolt it on. There's one more thing that I forgot, nearly forgot, and that's to make a gasket to go between those two flanges, because obviously I can't buy one for that. So Got some of the good stuff. It's like aluminium either side with some gaskety material in between. So let's chop out a bit of that. We can bolt it on. Well folks, there it is, the finished exhaust. The custom made stainless steel big bore 2332cc specs sidewinder exhaust. I'm really chuffed with that, and I hope you've enjoyed watching me make it as much as I've enjoyed making it myself. It's hopefully going to sound pretty cool as well, because 2.3 litres of power pumping through there, yeah, that's going to sound pretty decent, I reckon. Just going to sit back for a minute and admire my handiwork. Feeling quite smug at the moment because it's been a fairly involved project, this one. To be honest, obviously with the exception of shortening the floor pan and all the fabrication we did there, this is probably the biggest piece of fabrication on the entire car. And as I've said before, it is the main focal point when you look at the back of a buggy, and I can't wait to see how this thing looks with the body shell on. Really pleased. You might remember I said I was going to put a bracket between the muffler and the system there to brace it, but to be honest, it's really solid without that. And looking at other sidewinder exhausts, they don't seem to have them either, so I'm happy to leave it like it is. And in the future, if it vibrates more than I like, I can always add one, but I think we're going to be safe. Really pleased. Okay, that's the end of part 15 of building a beach buggy. Hopefully you've enjoyed watching me build this exhaust as much as I've enjoyed building it, because it has been awesome from start to finish. Well, saying that, I could have done with a few hours less on the sanding and polishing. That was a bit tedious, but 100% worth it. Totally over the moon with the result. Again, I've got to thank a few people on this one. Cheers to James at JL Innovation for letting me use his pipe flaring tool so that I could do those slip fits. Cheers to Nick from Fusion Engineering for lending me that really nice little glass cup when I stupidly threw mine on the floor. And again, massive thanks to my mate Steve for lending me his argon bottle so that I could back purge those welds. Speaking of Steve, it's just reminded me, look what he got me for my birthday last year. He handmade me a polished stainless steel scalpel with my name engraved in it with a little picture of my hot rod on it. How cool is that? Cheers, Steve. So yeah, you know the score. Instagram is Neil of Steel. You know what to do. Go out in the garage, convince yourself that the exhaust system on your car is crap and that you need to build a stainless steel one, because it's fun. You end up with something that looks cool, is hopefully going to sound cool, and it just makes the world a better place. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time for part 16 of building a beach buggy. See ya.